At 13:38 hours on December 4, 1950, Lieutenant Junior Grade Thomas Jerome Hudner, Jr. of Fighter Squadron 32 lifted off from the deck of the aircraft carrier USS Leyte. The carrier was positioned in the Sea of Japan, approximately 100 miles from the frozen mountains of North Korea. Hudner was 26 years old. He flew a Vought F-4U-4 Corsair, a single-engine fighter bomber with a 2,100 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double wasp radial engine. The aircraft weighed approximately 12,600 pounds fully loaded. It carried 650 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, 3 in each wing, with approximately 2,400 rounds of ammunition total. For this mission, Hudner also carried napalm bombs, rockets, and a belly tank of additional fuel. He was one of 6 pilots in Iroquois flight. The flight leader was Lieutenant Commander Dick Savoli, the squadron's executive officer. The other pilots were Lieutenant George Hudson, Lieutenant Junior Grade Bill Koenig, Ensign Ralph McQueen, and Ensign Jesse Leroy Brown. Brown was Hudner's wingman. He was also the first African American to complete United States Navy flight training. Their mission was to provide close air support to United States Marines trapped by Chinese forces near the Chosin Reservoir in the Taibak Mountains of northeastern North Korea. The Marines were fighting for survival against overwhelming odds. 1 week earlier, approximately 120,000 soldiers of the Chinese People's Volunteer Army's 9th Army Group had surrounded roughly 30,000 United Nations troops in the reservoir area. Temperatures had dropped to minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Medical supplies froze. Morphine syrettes had to be defrosted in medics' mouths before injection. Weapons malfunctioned in the extreme cold. The Marines were attempting a fighting withdrawal along a single narrow road through the mountains to the port of Hungnam, 78 miles to the south. The flight traveled 100 miles from Task Force 77's location to the reservoir, flying 35 to 40 minutes through harsh winter weather. They passed the ruined village of Udam-ni, where the 5th Marine Regiment had fought a desperate battle days earlier. The terrain below was snow-covered mountains and frozen valleys. Visibility was limited. The pilots descended to approximately 700 feet to search for targets and probe Chinese troop strength along the western side of the reservoir. At approximately 1400 hours, Brown's Corsair was struck by ground fire. Small caliber rifle fire, possibly from a Chinese position concealed in the snow, punctured the aircraft's oil line. Oil began spraying across the engine cowling. Without oil, the engine would seize within minutes. Brown radioed his flight. His transmissions indicated he was losing oil pressure. Rapidly. He could not maintain altitude. He would have to crash land. There was nowhere safe to land. Below was enemy-held territory, mountainous terrain covered in snow and ice, with Chinese troops positioned throughout the area. The nearest friendly position was miles away. A crash landing in these conditions, if Brown survived the impact, would leave him stranded in sub-zero temperatures, surrounded by enemy forces. Brown selected a slope on the side of a mountain. He brought his Corsair down in a wheels-up belly landing. The impact was violent. The aircraft struck the frozen ground and slid through waist-deep snow before coming to rest. The fuselage crumpled. The cockpit bent at approximately a 30-degree angle to the rest of the aircraft. Smoke began rising from the engine. The other pilots circled overhead. They feared Brown had not survived the impact. Then they saw movement. Brown opened his canopy and waved. He was alive, but he was trapped. The crash had crushed the cockpit around Brown's legs. The instrument panel had collapsed onto his right leg, pinning him in place. He could not pull himself free. Smoke continued to rise from the damaged engine. Fire was a real possibility. Lieutenant Junior Grade Koenig climbed to altitude and transmitted a mayday call requesting a rescue helicopter. The response was discouraging. A helicopter was at least 30 minutes away, possibly longer. In 30 minutes, Brown could freeze to death, burn to death, or be captured by Chinese troops moving through the area. Hudner made a decision. He called Savoli and announced his intention to crash land his own aircraft to assist Brown. It was an unprecedented action. No naval aviator had ever deliberately destroyed his own aircraft to aid a downed pilot in enemy territory. The chances of success were minimal. The chances of both pilots dying or being captured were high. Civoli did not argue. He simply replied with 2 words, "Good luck, Tom." Hudner jettisoned his napalm bombs, dropped his external fuel tank, and fired off his remaining rockets to reduce weight and eliminate fire hazards. He put his Corsair into a tight carrier-style approach toward the slope where Brown's aircraft lay. He lowered his landing gear, then retracted it, and executed a deliberate wheels-up landing approximately 100 yards from Brown's position. The impact threw Hudner forward in his cockpit. His back struck the seat with force sufficient to cause an injury that would persist for 6 to 8 years. But he was conscious. He was mobile. He climbed out of his wrecked aircraft. The snow was waist-deep. The temperature was approximately minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Hudner was not dressed for survival on the ground. He wore a standard flight suit and flight jacket, adequate for the heated cockpit of his Corsair, but insufficient for extended exposure to these conditions. He began wading through the snow toward Brown's aircraft, covering approximately 50 yards. He found Brown conscious but in severe distress. Brown's right leg was crushed and trapped beneath the collapsed instrument panel. He was bleeding. He was already suffering from the extreme cold. Frostbite was setting in. The engine compartment continued to smoke, threatening to burst into flames at any moment. Hudner tried to pull Brown free. The instrument panel would not move. He tried again, bracing himself against the fuselage and pulling with all his strength. Brown did not budge. The metal was bent around his leg in a way that made extraction impossible without tools. Hudner turned to the engine. Fire would kill Brown faster than the cold. Using his bare hands, he began packing snow into the smoking engine, cowling and around the fuselage. His hands grew numb. Frostbite began affecting his fingers. He continued packing snow, trying to smother the heat before flames could erupt. Brown drifted in and out of consciousness. During moments of clarity, he spoke to Hudner. At one point, he said words that Hudner would remember for the rest of his life. "Tell Daisy I love her." Daisy was Brown's wife. They had married in secret during Brown's flight training because cadets were prohibited from marriage. They had a young daughter, Pamela, who was not yet 2 years old. Hudner waded back through the snow to his own crashed aircraft. The radio still functioned. He transmitted to the circling aircraft overhead, requesting that a helicopter be dispatched immediately with an axe and fire extinguisher. An axe might cut through the metal trapping Brown's leg. A fire extinguisher might buy more time if flames broke out. Above, Civoli and the remaining pilots continued to circle, watching, unable to help from the air. They had already been airborne for hours. Fuel was becoming a concern, but they would not leave until a helicopter arrived. The helicopter came. Marine First Lieutenant Charlie Ward, piloting a Sikorsky HO-3S-1 rescue helicopter, had been alerted to the emergency. The HO-3S was a small helicopter with limited power at high altitude and in cold conditions. Landing on a snow-covered mountain slope in these temperatures pushed the aircraft to its operational limits. Ward landed anyway. He brought an axe and fire extinguisher. For approximately 45 minutes, Hudner and Ward worked to free Brown from the wreckage. They hacked at the twisted metal with the axe. The cold had made the aluminum harder and more resistant to cutting. They had no firm footing in the deep snow, limiting the force they could apply. Progress was agonizingly slow. They considered amputation. If they could sever Brown's trapped leg, they might be able to pull him free. But the same conditions that made cutting the metal nearly impossible also made field amputation impractical. They had no proper surgical tools. The cold had numbed their hands. There was no stable surface to work from. The risk of killing Brown through blood loss or shock was too high. As they worked, Brown grew weaker. His periods of consciousness became shorter. His voice grew fainter. At some point during those 45 minutes, Ensign Jesse Leroy Brown died. The combination of blood loss, shock, and hypothermia had claimed him. He was 24 years old. Darkness was approaching. The HO-3S helicopter had unreliable brakes and was parked on an icy slope. If they waited much longer, Ward would be unable to take off in the dark. The helicopter would be stranded. All three men would die or be captured. Ward made the situation clear to Hudner. They had to leave now or not at all. Hudner understood that Brown was beyond saving. Remaining would accomplish nothing except adding 2 more casualties. He made the decision to leave his friend's body behind. The helicopter lifted off the mountain slope and carried Hudner and Ward to safety. They reached friendly lines as night fell over the Chosin Reservoir. In the days that followed, Hudner's commanding officers considered what to do. He had deliberately destroyed a naval aircraft without orders. He had potentially endangered the helicopter pilot by requesting an extraction from enemy territory. By strict interpretation of military regulations, he could face court-martial. Instead, they recommended him for the Medal of Honor. The wreckage of Brown's Corsair remained on that North Korean mountainside. 3 days after the crash, on December 7, 1950, a flight of Corsairs from Fighter Squadron 32 returned to the site. From the air, they could see Brown's body still in the cockpit. There was no way to recover him from enemy territory. The pilots made a decision. They dropped napalm on the 2 wrecked aircraft, giving Jesse Brown a warrior's funeral pyre rather than leaving his remains to the enemy. Jesse Leroy Brown was born on October 13, 1926, in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. His mother, Julia, was a school teacher. His father, John, worked as a warehouse worker before becoming a sharecropper during the Great Depression. Jesse was one of 6 children raised in the segregated South. His parents taught their children that education and hard work were the paths out of poverty. At age 6, his father took him to an air show in Hattiesburg. The experience ignited a lifelong fascination with flight. As a teenager, Brown worked as a paperboy delivering the Pittsburgh Courier, an African-American newspaper. He read about black aviators like Eugene Jacques Bullard and Bessie Coleman. He read aviation magazines obsessively. In 1937, at age 11, he wrote a letter to President Franklin Roosevelt complaining about the injustice of keeping African-American pilots out of the Army Air Corps. Brown graduated from Eureka High School in Hattiesburg in 1944. His principal wrote him a letter as he left for Ohio State University, calling him a hero for being the first graduate of their segregated school to attend a predominantly white university. At Ohio State, Brown worked the midnight shift loading boxcars for the Pennsylvania Railroad to pay for his education while maintaining high grades and majoring in architectural engineering. In 1946, Brown learned of the Navy's V-5 Aviation Cadet Training Program. The program operated at 52 colleges, none of which were historically black institutions. Brown saw it as his only chance to fly. Navy recruiters told him he would never see the inside of a cockpit. He persisted. He took the entrance exams multiple times until he passed. His path through flight training was marked by discrimination and setbacks. At least one instructor actively tried to fail him, but others recognized his skill and dedication. On October 21, 1948, Jesse Brown completed Navy flight training and received his Naval Aviator wings. The Associated Press profiled him. His photograph appeared in Life magazine. He had broken a barrier that had stood since the Navy's founding. In January 1949, Brown was assigned to Fighter Squadron 32 aboard USS Wright, later transferring to USS Leyte. He flew the F-4U Corsair. Despite his lower rank, he had more flight hours and experience than many of his squadron mates, including Thomas Hudner. The 2 men became friends, despite their vastly different backgrounds. Brown was a devoted husband and father. He wrote to his wife Daisy almost daily. He spoke of her and their daughter constantly. He had completed 20 combat missions in Korea before December 4, 1950, earning the Air Medal for attacks against enemy positions at Wonsan, Chongjin, Songjin, and Sinanju. He had pressed home attacks in the face of heavy anti-aircraft fire. He was known as a skilled and aggressive pilot. He became the first African-American naval officer killed in the Korean War. He was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal, and the Purple Heart. Thomas Jerome Hudner, Jr. was born on August 31, 1924, in Fall River, Massachusetts. His father was a successful New England businessman. The family valued character over status, a principle passed down through generations from an Irish immigrant ancestor. Hudner attended Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, where he was captain of the track team and played football and lacrosse. He served on the student council. He was accepted to Harvard University, following his father's footsteps. Then a telegram arrived from Congressman Joseph Martin. Hudner had been appointed to the United States Naval Academy. He entered Annapolis in 1943. His class, the class of 1947, would produce the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, and 2 Medal of Honor recipients. The other was James Stockdale, who would receive the medal for his actions as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. Hudner and Stockdale remained friends throughout their lives. After graduation, Hudner served in the surface fleet on USS Helena and at Pearl Harbor before requesting flight training in 1948. He earned his Naval Aviator wings in August 1949 and joined Fighter Squadron 32 in November of that year. When he joined the squadron, one of the experienced pilots he met was Jesse Brown. Hudner came to admire Brown for what he had overcome, for his skill as an aviator, and for his devotion to his family. Their friendship was genuine, crossing the racial divide that still marked American society in 1950. On April 13, 1951, President Harry Truman presented Thomas Hudner with the Medal of Honor at the White House. The citation reads in part, quote, "Fully aware of the extreme danger in landing on the rough mountainous terrain and the scant hope of escape or survival in sub-zero temperature, he put his plane down skillfully in a deliberate wheels-up landing in the presence of enemy troops. With his bare hands, he packed the fuselage with snow to keep the flames away from the pilot and struggled to pull him free," unquote. Also present at the ceremony was Daisy Brown, Jesse's widow. Hudner found a moment to speak with her privately. He told her he was with Jesse when he died. He delivered Jesse's last message. "Tell Daisy I love her." Hudner and Daisy Brown remained in contact for more than 50 years. The crash landing injured Hudner's back, grounding him for a month. He flew 27 combat missions during the Korean War before USS Leyte rotated back to the Atlantic Fleet in January 1951. He was the first service member to receive the Medal of Honor during the Korean War, though several others would receive the medal for actions that occurred before December 4, 1950. Hudner served 27 years in the Navy, retiring as a captain in 1973. He served as a flight instructor at Naval Air Station Corpus Christi, flew experimental aircraft with Air Development Squadron 3, and served as executive officer of USS Kitty Hawk during the Vietnam War. After retirement, he worked as a management consultant, served with the United Service Organizations, and from 1991 to 1999, served as commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Veterans Services. On February 17, 1973, days before Hudner's retirement, the Navy commissioned USS Jesse L. Brown, a Knox-class frigate and the third United States vessel named for an African American. Hudner spoke at the commissioning ceremony in Boston. Daisy Brown, who had remarried and was now Daisy Brown Thorne, was present along with her daughter Pamela. In 2013, at age 88, Hudner traveled to North Korea in an attempt to recover Jesse Brown's remains from the crash site. North Korean authorities told him to return in September when the weather would be more predictable. The remains were never recovered. Hudner never considered himself a hero for his actions on December 4, 1950. He said approximately 90 people over the years told him he had acted recklessly. His commanders issued orders after the incident forbidding pilots from attempting similar crash landings. Hudner did not regret his decision. He said it was a spur-of-the-moment action, and that if it had been him down there, Jesse would have done the same thing. Thomas Jerome Hudner Jr. died on November 13, 2017, at his home in Concord, Massachusetts. He was 93 years old. He was the last living Navy recipient of the Medal of Honor from the Korean War. On April 4, 2018, he was interred at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. General Joseph Dunford, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, attended the ceremony. So did members of Jesse Brown's family. On December 2018, the Navy commissioned USS Thomas Hudner, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer. The ship was christened on April 1, 2017, with Hudner in attendance 7 months before his death. In 2022, the film Devotion was released, telling the story of Jesse Brown and Thomas Hudner. Jonathan Majors portrayed Brown. Glenn Powell portrayed Hudner. The film was based on the 2015 biography by Adam Makos, written with Hudner's cooperation over 7 years. Jesse Brown's remains have never been recovered. His official status is listed as missing in action. His name is inscribed on the Courts of the Missing at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Hawaii. His widow Daisy died in 2014. Their daughter Pamela has continued to honor her father's memory. The friendship between Thomas Hudner and Jesse Brown crossed every boundary that divided American society in 1950. Race, class, geography, upbringing. None of it mattered when one man saw another trapped and dying in the wreckage of his aircraft. Hudner did not calculate the odds. He did not wait for orders. He did not consider what his action might cost him. He put his plane down in the snow and tried to save his friend. The Medal of Honor citation describes his action as exceptionally valiant. It notes his selfless devotion to a shipmate. These are the formal words required by military tradition. The reality is simpler. On a frozen mountainside in North Korea, in December 1950, Thomas Hudner refused to let Jesse Brown die alone. He failed to save him, but he was there at the end, and he carried Jesse's last message home to the woman he loved. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We are committed to telling the stories of every Medal of Honor recipient, more than 3,500 stories spanning more than 160 years of American military history. Each story deserves to be told. Each recipient deserves to be remembered. Leave a comment below. Tell us where you are watching from. Share any connection you might have to this story. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. And to those who have served and those who continue to serve, thank you for your service.